What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Powerline Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Lucas, and 25 episodes, guys. This is amazing. I'm not doing this once a week. It's a struggle sometimes to get these things recorded and produced, but this has been an amazing journey, and I appreciate each and every one of you and your support in whether you're just shooting me a DM that says, dude, I really like what you're doing, or you've been heavily involved in this, or a guest on the show. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Just wanted to let you know that. And if you could go to whatever podcast app that you listen to these things on and like and share them with people in the community that you think might benefit from these or might like these episodes, because that's going to help it grow and help get some of these amazing guests and what they have to say into the ears of the people out there in this community, in the Powerline industry. So before we get into this next guest, we're going to go to a word from our sponsors, but super excited to bring you this next guest here. Brady Hansen is a lineman in the industry that a lot of you recognize or know of. You know of his name, or you've met him before out there at various rodeos or events, or you've had him come speak to your groups before. Very, very knowledgeable man, well-spoken, super passionate about linemen and the powerline industry and making a difference in this trade, not only here locally within North America, but also abroad. So there is tons of good content within this conversation. But like I said, right before we get into that, quick word from our sponsors for the show, and then we'll get after it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. So our sponsor for this show is Tallman Equipment. And for the entire month of January, Tallman Equipment will be doing a special fundraiser. They've teamed up and created a t-shirt with the National Sisterhood of Union Journeyman Linemen, otherwise known as the NSUJL. The NSUJL is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting families of fallen or injured linemen and other line workers. They can be found at nsujl.org. All proceeds from the sale of these shirts in the month of January will be donated to the NSUJL. It's a great cause. The shirt sizes range from adult small to adult 4XL. So you can find them online at www.tallmanequipment.com/t-shirt/. So again, that's www.tallmanequipment.com/t-shirt/. Tallman Equipment is trusted by linemen since 1952. All right, guys, that's it for me for now. Let's get into this episode of Powerline Podcast. Later. Brady Hansen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. It's an honor to be on this thing.
Hey,
I really enjoy what you've done with this forum and giving people an opportunity to share dialogue across this industry. It's super cool.
It's just something that's not being done for the most part on a wide scale. I'd like to advance and grow it, but it's all part of it. I know that a lot of guests I have talked to and a lot of people out there in the industry know your name and have brought your name up to me a few times as somebody I need to talk to, and especially talk to on this show. So I'm excited to have connected with you and stoked that you are willing to come on the show and talk to the industry.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Let's start from the beginning, like we usually do, just to give people some context. Where are you from?
I grew up in a little town called Phillip, South Dakota. It's out in the western part of South Dakota, a tiny little town, and that's where I grew up. It's about, I think, 900 people in it right now. So,
oh, wow. So what was growing up like in a town of 900 people?
I think it was a pretty good small town life. I played sports and I got to have summer jobs, and The high school was just the right size where you could really be engaged in a lot of activities if you wanted to be engaged in a lot of activities. And I enjoyed hunting and fishing. A lot of my family was engaged in that. So there were ample opportunities to do that in South Dakota. And there was a lot, even though it was a rural community, and there wasn't necessarily the same opportunities that you'd have in a metropolitan area, there were a lot of other advantages like safety. It was a really safe place to live. And if you were somebody that wanted to work and wanted to learn things, there were a lot of opportunities to work construction or at a grocery store or on a farm or a ranch. And so the rural lifestyle, even though technically I was considered a town kid growing up back in that area, there were a lot of things that I think were a really good segue into my career today. Now, being an FFA, I know helped me be a better lineman today. Having an opportunity to get involved with working on my family's ranch at branding time. I'd go out to my uncle's ranch or my grandpa's ranch and get to help with branding calves and stuff like that. All of that exposes you to things that later you get to utilize in the line trade, like getting stuck. Getting stuck is a great example. I learned how to drive in bad conditions and get unstuck because of where I grew up. So
I tell people I had a similar youth and a similar upbringing. Lived kind of in the country. I didn't live on a ranch, but had access to things like you're talking about, just the outdoors and being outside. And mom and dad used to just kick us outside all the time. Mom especially would just kick my brother and I outside, and we'd figure it out all day. Like we'd come back for lunch, she'd feed us a sandwich and a couple cookies, and we'd be gone again, either dirt biking or just playing, just gone in the bush doing whatever. She didn't know where we were half the time. She says she knew where we were the whole time, which I kind of believe her.
yeah,
But it does expose you to things that you would never be exposed to, had you not been given that, like you said, getting stuck or breaking down. For us, we broke down on our dirt bikes all the time. Like, okay, what are you going to do? How are you going to fix this?
yeah.
You double all the way back to the house, grab whatever tools you figure you needed and whatever you could to get it done, and you get your bike going again and get back. And you had to figure those things out. What other things did you do? Like, what did you play for sports, and did those kind of help you with your career later as well?
Yeah, I think so. I played football. I played baseball. I played basketball. I was miserable at track. I was miserable at golf, but I tried a lot of things. I think baseball was my favorite sport, probably followed by football.
So no ice hockey, eh?
No, ice hockey wasn't an opportunity where I grew up. Neither was soccer or lacrosse or anything like that. And my hometown was really a wrestling town.
Oh, cool.
There was actually a very prominent wrestler that went on to wrestle in the Olympics and wrestle in Iowa. So the town really had a reputation for being a wrestling town. I guess I got to fill in those other sports and had fun. Had a lot of fun playing sports.
What did mom and dad do?
My dad works for a telephone company. He's a telecommunications guy, fixes and troubleshoots and repairs fiber optic lines and copper telephone lines for a company called Golden West. And my mom worked as a florist for a while, and now she works at the county courthouse.
Oh, right on. So, how did you find line work? I asked this question to quite a few of the guests because I love the stories of some people and how they actually find the trade. I'm assuming that maybe through telecommunications is kind of how you came to know it, but how did you find line work?
Kind of, it was a little more circuitous than that. The way I stumbled into it is I started delivering papers when I was in the 7th grade, and I had money that I thought was more than I should reasonably spend every month. So I decided to start investing in the stock market. And
like every 7-year-old does.
So, at my grandpa's suggestion, I started to invest in these stocks. And at the time, it made the most sense to invest in companies that were very financially sound and resilient and also paid a dividend. So I bought stock in a company called Pacific Core and MDU. So I bought a pair of utility stocks, and Warren Buffett always advises people to look at the numbers in the back of the annual report and not to pay attention to the glossy photos in the front. But every time I'd get an annual report and I'd see these sweeping images of what people in the industry do, hydroelectric projects and transmission lines and substations and stuff, I kind of started to fall in love with the industry in the back of my mind. And then I went to college for finance. I thought I wanted to be a stockbroker for a while, and I spent some time there, but I got really disenfranchised with sort of the thinking of academic finance while I was there. It didn't make sense. It got really reliant on advanced mathematical models that I didn't think were necessarily relevant. So I left and started to chart a course for line work, knowing that it was a great occupation and knowing that there was a need for it. And it turns out I did go to work for a telecommunications contractor right away and started doing fiber optics in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I just knew that I needed to keep building my skill set to get in the door of an apprenticeship program. So I learned how to climb while working for a telecommunications contractor and got my own CDL and started to work on my flagger's card and kind of took the old school route, I guess, to getting into the apprenticeship.
That's a way that I think is coming back again in a lot of ways. That's what I try to tell young people, because they ask me all the time, these guys that are trying to get into the trade, they constantly ask, how do I get into it? Like what's going to make me get through the door? Because it's tough to get into, especially in British Columbia here. We only got a handful a year that get in to apprenticeships, and it's really difficult. I just say, what's going to separate you from the guy beside you? Yeah. I'll even go talk to a group of 20 in a pre-apprenticeship course, spending, $15,000 in a pre-apprenticeship course. And I'll tell them, like, what's separating you from the guy right beside you right now? He's got the same credentials at the end of this. So what's going to make you look better? And it finally starts to click with some of them, and they're starting to get, their class 1 drivers, truckers driver's licenses, and, chainsaw certifications and different little electrical certifications. And I don't know, it's what's separating them from the rest. And you're gonna have to spend a little money sometimes to get there, but it's going to pay off in the end.
Absolutely.
So what did apprenticeship look like?
So I got my apprenticeship through a JATC program called the Northwest Jdc. Okay. So the telecommunications contractor I was working for was bought out by Quanta Services. And as soon as we got out by Quanta Services, I went, aha, this is my chance. So I got on the internet and looked up Quanta Services homepage and looked up the contractors that belong to this Quanta family. And I discovered up in Seattle, Washington, there was a company called Patelco, and they had both a telephone side and a power side. And so I just picked up the phone and I looked up a guy's name, Peter Cloutier, and I called the guy up and said, hey, I have hooks and will travel. And he said, well, we need somebody over here for a contract we just got in the Seattle area. So can you be here Monday? And I said, absolutely. So I went over and went to work for him. And he told me if I worked hard and did a good job, after a year or two, they'd give me a good word when it came to applying for the Northwest Jdc. So after I worked for them for about a year and a half, I went down to Portland and interviewed with the Northwest Jdc and was selected. And I got to work about the first half of my apprenticeship in the Puget Sound region, working for Patelco. Yep. And that was kind of an interesting time there, because there had been a transition where Puget Sound and Energy had gotten rid of a lot of their crews and were going strictly with the contract force. So I was kind of there for that transition, got to see the good and the bad, both of that. And then about halfway through, I knew I wanted to go someplace else, not because I necessarily had a problem with the contractor I was working for or the guys I was working with or anything, but I'd always heard this mantra in that construction apprenticeship. if you're going to be a good lineman, you need to work for a couple different contractors, and you need to work on a couple different utilities, and you got to learn some different methodologies and framing standards and perspectives. And so about halfway through, I had a car accident and hurt my shoulder and took a layoff. And when I got healed up from my shoulder surgery, I went back to work for Wilson Construction. And so I finished out my apprenticeship by working for Wilson Construction over in Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, Northern Idaho, and a little bit in Montana.
I've spent some time down in the Puget Sound area as well, just on storm calls, being so close to that area, and Alltech working with Patelco quite a bit. It's a beautiful area to, it must have been a nice area to kind of spend and do your apprenticeship, a portion of your apprenticeship anyway.
Yeah. The weather compared to South Dakota, the weather was marvelous. I mean, I've never in my life had to shovel rain.
Yeah.
Shovel a lot of snow. I've never shoveled rain.
100%.
Yeah, and there was so much work there. My first year in the apprenticeship program, I had almost 1,000 hours of overtime. Yeah. So there was just so much falling apart, and car hit poles, and bad underground cables, and you name it. So I really loved the opportunity to just dive in head first. And especially in a metropolitan area. I don't want to take anything away from guys that do their apprenticeship at like a small co-op or a small muni or something like that. But because I respect everyone, but at the same time, you really learn a lot when you're in a dense urban area and you got multiple circuits on a pole and large feeder conductors and very complicated circuit geometry. So I really kind of relished that. And when you guys would come down on storm, I loved it because you guys would show up in the backs of your trucks, would have these goofy looking tie wires that I'd never seen before. And you guys were kind of leading the way with FR. So I remember one storm, I think it was 2002. I begged and borrowed and pleaded to get an Alltech jacket from a guy because it had the distinctive yellow X on the back and it was FR. And at the time, we were just in cotton then. Yeah. I thought it was just the coolest thing to have an actual Canadian jacket.
Well, that's awesome. We still have the same orange jackets.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a good area. And like you said, with the urban setup, I 100% agree with you on that. And I would stress that to anybody listening to get you some of that work down in the city. You just, the back alleys, the H-frames, like the geometry of the structures and the configurations of the line, like you're talking about, and the setup, just how you're going to set up trucks and how you're going to do this. It adds a whole nother level of complexity to the problem solving that is power line work. And I think it's important. One old guy said to me once that that working in the urban environment, a heavy urban environment like that, is really like the art of line work. It's where you can really get creative with how to do things. And I believe him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's another value that comes with that isn't frequently talked about. I wish we could get a sociologist to study our occupation sometime and to look at our cultural norms and our values and the means with which we communicate. I believe that cultural diffusion is one of the most significant things that has ever happened in North American linemen, because we've created a system in North America, some of it through the IBEW, some of it through other channels, that we can share ideas and concepts and work practices and tooling and lessons learned, and we can share it very rapidly across most of this continent. That makes all of us better. And I think you're exposed to more of that in major cities where, I'm working in Seattle. I worked with tramps that came out of Florida and out of Canada and out of Boston and out of Texas, and good or bad, you learn from everyone. Mm-hmm. And when you get a great deal of idea exchange and thought exchange and work practice exchange, I think you just put a lot more tools in your toolbox, and you develop a better, broader perspective of how to be a lineman, how to problem solve, how to communicate.
I think you've nailed it there. I've never heard it put that way, but you're 100% right. If you look at most trades out there, we are the most transient trade. I could probably say that really confidently, that we are, like quite cross cultural. And, you get a
Yeah.
guy from the East Coast working on the West Coast one week and vice versa and up and down. Yeah, you're totally right. It's a good way to transfer knowledge and skills and techniques at a rapid rate. They don't do that in any other trade. You don't really see carpenters doing that, or even electricians for that
Yeah.
matter, or plumbers or whatever. You see them moving around within kind of their jurisdictions and areas, but not really cross country on a rapid scale like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of, I find it interesting that in recent times, people have started to really value diversity as a strength. But historically, diversity has always been a very important lineman attribute, where you've got to have a diverse skill set to work on a variety of circuits in a diverse set of conditions, and to be able to work with diverse people who come from some other part of the country or some other utility or some other local or some other background. And the international work that I've done, places where I've been to where those linemen haven't had the same opportunity to just share ideas and to coalesce into a larger group of brains, um, that they're definitely hindered by that to some extent. They haven't been exposed to the same things that we have. And we've got our own issues here in North America, but it's certainly a strength for us to have a variety of ideas that float across this industry and are shared very rapidly. And especially that's what I like about this podcast and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. I think this communication medium is ushering in the golden age of linemen.
I totally agree with you. And when I look around and I see like this is really, there's just under a million podcasts if we just talk in podcasts because that's what we're on. There's just under a million, about 750,000. And in that 750,000, there's only two, three, four maybe talking about what we're talking about directed for our industry. And
Yeah.
it's in its infancy really. And
Mhm.
there's so much ability there to share. And just even the fact that we're doing this over Skype is pretty cool to be able to share these sorts of things in another new way where we don't have to get on an airplane and actually go physically get in front of people to share these ideas with. It's really cool. I think we need
Yeah.
to blow it up.
Yeah.
Collectively, we need to get together and do more of this for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I, I would like to talk more about the international stuff with you, but let's just carry on chronologically here for a sec. So you finish apprenticeship, and what does that look like for you? Bounce around as a lineman for a bit. What types of work do you get into? Distro,
Yeah.
transmission?
So let's see. I topped out and I worked for Wilson for a while, and then Avista Utilities was looking for some temp linemen in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And my wife at the time was from that area, so I hired on and took a job there. And I was very intentional about it. I really wanted to learn a lot of the skills that I didn't have the opportunity to learn in the construction apprenticeship. I wanted to learn about um, troubleshooting on a deeper level. I want to learn more about substation. I want to learn more about customer service and just what it was like to be a lineman at a utility. So I went to work there and I enjoyed it. I was there about a year, and just like everywhere you go in line work, if you work hard and have a good attitude, doors of opportunity come abounding open. And
Yeah.
so I had plenty of opportunities to get great training and do cool projects and stuff. But I'd heard a rumor in the trade that the Bonneville Power Administration was going to start performing bare hand maintenance. And that was another aspect of my knowledge and experience in the trade that I knew as a young lineman that I should probably try to go get. So after a year, I walked in and talked to the managers and said, "Hey guys, I like working here and everything, but I want to go take this opportunity with Bonneville." So I went to work for Bonneville and worked for Bonneville first out of the Bell Yard in Spokane, Washington. And then eventually I got on their traveling bare hand crew and worked on their traveling bare hand crew. And I was there about 5 or 6 years, just long enough I didn't have to pay the sign-on bonus back, and I left. I was just gone too much. I had 2 sons, still do have 2 sons, but they were young enough at the time. It was really impacting them. So I left Bonneville and I went back to work for Avista, and I was there the second time for about 9 years. So.
How did you find the so one of the things I noticed, through mediums like this and seeing things on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, like in the bare hand world right now, I'm seeing a lot of stuff that's questionable, to say the least, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Questionable work practice. I've seen a lot of it in a lot of areas of what we do. See very questionable stuff, but I'm taking higher note in the higher risk stuff, such as the helicopter work and the aviation work and bare hand work. And I've seen a lot of really suspect things. What's your experience with that so far as well? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think a friend of mine, his name's Chris Beckett. He actually has a term for it. He calls it a YouTube lineman. And he talks about how some younger linemen are just ensconced with this idea that they've got to go do a particular aspect of the line trade so they can take selfies while they're long lining. And with some respects, I think he's right. Some of the appeal to take pictures and to show the world what we're doing, I think sometimes creates deviant behaviors. And I know for myself, I've been guilty of that. There's been times I've been so excited. I remember the first time I got to do a long line rescue practice off a helicopter. I was thrilled. I took pictures of it, took videos of it, loved sharing it with people. But I guarantee my focus was off to some extent. And I think we're at a point now where the mentality of linemen needs to shift to be a little more technically focused. And especially in the realm of barehanding. There's some aspects of barehanding that are extremely technical. It's far more than just putting on a suit and throwing a set of sticks up and trying to swing out a string of bells or something.
Yeah.
There's much more stuff that we have to learn and understand and comprehend. And sometimes I think that gets glossed over or missed.
Yeah.
There's an aspect of line work, if you're framing poles and setting poles, there's not a lot of deep technical thought that goes into that. And you can easily migrate from that work and find yourself performing live line bare hand maintenance. And I really think you have to ratchet up your approach and your mentality and the way you do that work.
Yeah. I think you're right. I'm myself as well been guilty of it, but I know the level of training I had with people, with Quana actually is who I did my bare hand training with.
Yeah.
The level of training there as a baseline, I think is way more than the level of training as a baseline that I'm seeing from some of these people that are, not focusing on what they're doing and doing this type of stuff. And I think that plays a factor into it, as well as they get into, when you're just like spacing or you're just doing something in the bare hand realm that's just a little more simple. Like you can get on in a spacer cart and you can go all day long, and it's a little different than transferring a vertical dead end or something, where you got a big roll of hot wire in your bucket with you and you're above other phases. That's when, I agree with you. I think you really got to shift and get into that mindset. Like, hey guys, we're doing something extremely technical here. Let's turn off everything else, turn off the world and focus on what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know that this applies in all scenarios, but I think there's plenty of times where it would be of great benefit if we took an hour or 45 minutes even and really did a deep tailboard and talked about not only what we're doing, but some of the forces or some of the issues involved. Because I see a lot of complicated rigging scenarios where people are trying to do things like set a pole in a backyard, and so they're using the jib, the material handling jib, off the bucket truck, and a set of blocks, and they get the pole sap, but the way that all those forces are being distributed across the rigging components is probably in a manner that people aren't thinking about and talking about. And sometimes the equipment is engineered with enough safety factor into it we never notice. Other times stuff goes wrong. And I think there's a compulsion that starts in all of us, because a lot of us are type A personalities that want to get it done, where we show up at a location and we want to dive in and go to work. And so that's what we do. We start engaging our bodies and engaging movement really, really quickly, when in a lot of scenarios that sometimes I see shared on social, it would be great if we actually broke down, okay, so what if we try to set this 45-foot pole in a backyard using the jib off of a bucket and a set of roadblocks, and this guy over here is holding the tagline. How are those weights and forces being distributed right now across his work site? How much are we side loading the bucket? So I think there's good and bad with that kind of information. One of the bad is, I know there's been times where I've been so eager to catch a photo or catch a video of something that I start living through that little viewfinder on my phone.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we could do it constructively, we could take some of these images, some of these videos, and we could diagnose them like professional athletes diagnose game tape.
Yep. And
I think if we did that free of judgment, if we didn't have to deride the people that were being involved, but just said, you know what, let's just take a step back and let's look at their game plan, and let's look at the plays they're running. Maybe there's another way we can play defense here.
Fully agree with you. I think
for that.
It would be a great, and I think people should do that. And instead, see, this is where you almost split the safety realm a little bit too. And you get people with a mindset like yourself, and then you get the people with the mindset that are just out to hang you or point a finger at you and go, look at what you're doing wrong, and I caught you.
Yeah.
And like you said, you'd have to be completely non-biased when you're watching it and use it totally as a learning tool, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you would get a lot of value out of that. It's one of the things I really appreciated with the way I was taught bare hand live line procedures and writing these procedures and executing them. Was I really appreciated the fact that if there was any deviation or change in the procedure, in the written procedure, that everyone agreed upon, if there was any change or deviation in that, work stopped. Everybody got together, everybody came up with a new solution to the problem, agreed upon it, wrote it down, and then went back to work to execute. I know, like, if you're talking small deviations in distribution work, like, you're not going to do that, but you could scale that though. And maybe it just means that everybody comes down for a second, talks about what they got going on, and then goes back to executing, instead of just making these on the fly decisions when maybe not everyone on the crew is aware of them, or maybe somebody else on the crew would have an opinion that would be a better suited method of doing it. So I really liked that about the way I was taught bare hand work. And I think I try to push that. I tried to push it into the crews when I went to distribution and regular transmission work, just to pause and talk about what you're going to do and kind of regroup a little bit. If it was a significant change, if it was minor, I'm not talking about minor changes, but significant changes, I think really need to be talked about.
Yeah. I used to be on the EPRI Live Working Committee, and I'm trying to think of the name of the guy from Quanta that was also a member. I was asking him because they were talking about how Quanta had pulled off 3.5 million hours of bare hand work without an incident. George, I believe his name was George. Dang, I wish I could think of his name. And I think he's down at the Lazy Q now.
Is it Greg?
Yeah, might be Greg Bell. Is that it?
Yeah, Greg Bell. Yep.
Yes. One of my idols, I guess, is a guy like that that's been around and been exposed to the things that he.
Very smart man, for sure.
And he said, very, very smart man. I asked him, I said, what is the single most important component of that success? And he told me exactly what you said. It's a tailboard and the way we do the tailboard process.
Yep.
And He said, when you stop the job and everybody comes down off the tower and does the tailboard again, pretty soon you get people being on the same page pretty quickly.
Yep.
And wow, isn't it amazing that simple meeting and that conveyance of understanding that can take place at the start of every job is that powerful in this trade of ours?
People don't realize the importance of the tailboard, and it's something that we're trying to change. I know that the people I work with, we're trying to change it right now, developing proper tailboard training to train our foremen and sub foremen and right all the levels up for that matter, how to execute and deliver a proper tailboard and write a proper tailboard, both for protecting themselves
Yeah.
legally, protecting
Yeah.
the company legally, but most important, just executing a safe and efficient project or job, whatever,
Yeah.
small or big. And it is an important document, and it's an important meeting to have. It's communication 101, really. You wouldn't go into battle without a plan. I bring that up a few times as well. There's no way you'd go into a battle in Ramadi, Iraq without a proper briefing, right?
Yeah.
Same similar thing. We're going into these situations and these projects completely not knowing weights, forces, dynamics, all the factors of it. We go in blind, and if you don't have a proper briefing and you haven't thought this stuff through and talked about it, you're just knocked down your chances of success, and it could be that simple. Period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's ironic that we'll spend millions of dollars on equipment and tooling and sometimes get in too much of a hurry.
Yeah.
Or feel too much pressure to have a really good tailboard.
That's the balance too. That the pressure, the pressure to produce is something that's the companies, utilities. I think that's a lot of the pressure comes from that. I think a lot of the pressure is self-induced pressure as well. It may not even be there, but we're putting that on ourselves. But definitely pressures have to be looked at as well. So how did you're making your way through line work, and you have transitioned into more of like a training and safety advocate type stuff. Like walk us through that transition through line work and into what you're kind of doing now.
Okay. So I've always enjoyed reading and studying and learning about our trade. And I think the confluence of the fact that I like to read so much and like to study so much about our trade, and the fact that I enjoy speaking in front of people, or I guess at least I'm not afraid of speaking in public people.
Yep.
Meant I found myself being involved more and more with safety roles or some sort of safety leadership role or something. And then I had a mentor, and he's an idol of mine, and he is to many, many linemen in the Pacific Northwest, and for that matter, all across the country. His name is Harvey Haven. And Harvey was a lineman for the Bonneville Power Administration. And decades and decades ago, he began to advocate for equipotential grounding as a lineman, not as a health and safety professional, not as an engineer, but as a lineman. And he pioneered a concept for teaching the idea, and the tool is called a dirt box. And so he'd basically build a miniaturized version of a line and fill dirt around it, and then energize the thing in order to create a voltage gradient across the soil. And then he'd use light bulbs to illustrate human beings. And he would teach grounding concepts and then also use the light bulbs to reenact grounding accidents to help you understand the why of equipotential grounding. So at one point, he reached out to me and said he was going to start to transition away from doing that kind of training across the industry, and ask if I would consider kind of picking up the torch and running with it. And the only thing I could think to tell him was absolutely yes. So I started doing dirt box equipotential grounding discussions for contractors and utilities and safety events and stuff across the industry while I was working at Avista. And then I also started teaching in their Saturday school program. And I really enjoyed that because there were a lot of things that I enjoyed about apprenticeship, and there were some things that I didn't enjoy about apprenticeship. And I know whenever I'm studying a subject in order to teach it, it makes me a better lineman because I have to study even deeper and to really grasp the concepts well. So I started teaching Saturday school and then doing this stuff on the side. And then pretty soon, I found myself being out of vacation time, perpetually out of vacation time at the utility I was working at. And eventually that started to create some frictions. So a startup company came along and they told me they'd like me to go to work for them. But because they were in the startup mode, they didn't have the ability to sort of pay me my lineman wage and benefit that I was used to at Avista. And I said, you know what, guys, I'm fine with that. If you guys can just cover me part-time and get my health insurance, I'll go do as much of this training and safety advocacy as I can across the industry. If you guys will give me license to do that, I'll walk away from my lineman job and do that. So I left Avista and went to work for a startup company called Safeguard Equipment. And that's actually where I am today. I came in here this morning to handle some stuff. So I went to work for them and just started booking more and more of these sessions, whether it be sometimes I'll do like keynote addresses at safety conferences and stuff. And a lot of times I'm teaching either equipotential grounding or rigging or test instruments and troubleshooting. That's one of my favorites lately. Transformer connections. I started a company called Written in Red. That's what we're calling it right now. I've got a website out there and stuff, but it's predominantly been word of mouth. I found that the single most important thing for me to do in this industry is to plan on word of mouth. Reputation's everything. So that's what I've been doing for a full-time gig for about a year and a half now.
This Written in Red, explain that a little bit more and maybe where these guys can find out information.
So the website is writteninredtraining.com, and the whole concept with Written in Red is I want to focus primarily on post-journeyman education. There is a whole host of people in the industry that are currently engaged in training for pre-apprentice workers. There's not a great deal out there to help journeymen go from the plateau that they find themselves on to the next level. So what I'm trying to do is to create content and to create training that help linemen, number one, obtain the next level skill set that they want to gain in a particular subject. And then number two, get on a pathway of lifelong learning. So I really think our careers are kind of comprised of two components. One is a directed apprenticeship, that first 3.5 to 5 years. And then after that, we're on a self-directed apprenticeship. Well, what's a roadmap for that look like? I think a roadmap for that for linemen ought to include being part of various associations, making it an annual activity to go to some sort of post-journeyman learning and development system, program, class, training, etc. And I don't even think the company necessarily has to sponsor it. I think it should be incumbent upon us. You know what? I'm a journeyman lineman. My goal for 2020 is I'm going to learn X and Y, and I can learn X and Y by either attending this conference or participating in a webinar, signing up for an online class. So the whole spirit of Written in Red is how to try to build these systems that help linemen kind of get to the next level, and then also do things like join the IEEE or get a subscription to Incident Prevention Magazine or attend a training seminar someplace. And I'm trying to be anti-PowerPoint because for adult-based education, PowerPoint training has proved very, very ineffective. So I kind of follow Harvey Haven's model of trying to make stuff hands-on. Yep. So for my grounding class, I try to have a dirt box and a bunch of hands-on exercises. For my rigging class, I've got H structures that I can strap to a table, and I can build a bunch of H structure lines in a classroom. And there's a company that makes 3D printed blocks and 3D shackles and 3D sling at these little tanks and stuff, so we can lift transformers and sling loads and pull wire and do a bunch of stuff, all with little digital scales that help us to understand forces, like dynamic load versus static load, like block factor. So that's really what I'm driving for, because I think some industries do have something figured out better than we do, and that's post-journeyman education. Electricians have a continuing education unit that they have to constantly keep up on. So do lawyers, so do accountants. But journeyman linemen should as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. I 100%. It's been something that's been on my mind to help promote as well. I almost think that it's like, I look at being in this generation and seeing, being on social all the time, the fitness industry is in your face, nonstop. Yeah. Right.
Yep.
And what I like about the fitness industry is how ahead of the game they are with stuff like this. Right. And they're very business minded, and coaching is such a big thing for them. And I'm thinking, like, why don't we have coaches? Why doesn't the line trade have a line coach? Somebody that is a peer that these guys can, look up to and call upon for advice, connections, support, like whatever it is, at coaching you through your career at whatever stage that is, from beginning to end, can jump in there and they know what to do and how to, prescribe you a plan.
Yeah.
It's just like a fitness plan or an eating plan. It's the same sort of thing. Like, what do you want to do to get in line shape? Really, essentially. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I love where you're going with that. So full support on that. That's awesome. It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's been fun, and I get to experiment with a lot of different things. Somebody will call me up and they want to do a class on something, and so then I got to work my butt off to try to put something together, and I learn a lot in the end, and I try to open source everything I do.
Yeah,
I think we're in the era where making things proprietary just don't work. So I find when I open source, I create a lot more opportunities to network some other folks.
Yep.
And I want to work on stuff like, why don't we have a communications class, post-journeyman communications class for journeyman?
Yeah.
Why don't we have some mental health stuff? We're certainly good at working for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and working in a stressful, at times hazardous occupation. Mental health is a component of that, but yet if you look out amid all the training and information out there, that there's not a mental health, and you can't even call it mental health. Mental health has got too much negative stigma, right? You'd never get anybody to show up for that. You have to call it brain health, or taking care of your most important organ class or something. You'd have to call it something like that. So
I think it's huge. I was recently on another podcast hosted by a former firefighter, and in the fire and emergency services industry, mental health is a huge thing, right? Just with the stuff that they see on a regular basis, the post-traumatic stress syndrome, the sleep deprivation, all lead to work schedules, lead to, a lot of mental health issues within that industry. And he kind of asked me that question, and I don't personally have a lot of experience with it. I know when I was growing up and I was quite young, my father is his best friend, another lineman. He was like a second father to us, and I know he suffered with some sort of mental health issues because he ended up taking his own life. And I don't know all the details around that, and my father doesn't really talk about it, but I know now, being in the trade for 20 years, I can see it a little bit. I don't have direct experience with it, and I don't
Yeah.
myself. But if you have a story or something that you'd like to share or talk about it a little bit, feel free to talk about it, because I know it's been a question brought up to me, like, why don't you have somebody talk about mental health? And I just haven't found the right guest yet. But if you have something to say about it, feel free.
Well, I think I'm probably not the perfect guest to talk about it because I certainly haven't mastered it, and I certainly haven't taken care of my mental health. I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say is I'm somebody that has practiced sleep deprivation to the point of peril. I'm somebody who's at times tried to combat the loneliness of the road with a little too much alcohol. I'm somebody who absolutely wants to pound a couple rock stars sometimes to get through a hard day. I'm somebody that's willing to work and 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 not necessarily take time to decompress. And all those are components of mental health. I lost a friend in the trade that I was very close to. And I know for a while that really impacted my mental health. And another one of our coworkers ended up taking his life. And I don't know all of the details there, but I do know there was certainly some components of mental health. And I think in retrospect, had I been a little more willing to think about it and a little more willing to engage, maybe things would have been different. I don't know that, but I suspect that. And I know that as time goes on, this trade will continue to evolve as it always has. And that's honestly one of the things that I kind of like about something that's taking place in the trade right now. People talk about a softness that is growing in the trade because we've got additional rules, or now we've got a new generation of people that have entered the line trade and they've got a different value system, or they place significance on different things. I think as time moves on, our mental health aspects in the line trade are probably going to get better. You know, it is definitely a detriment to be at a utility where a bunch of new apprentices don't want to work overtime.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the case for all new apprentices, but it certainly is a trend that many people across the industry are observing. So in one regard, it's a disadvantage. Now, on the other hand, if those people have enough internal fortitude to say, you know what, no, I'm going to take my Saturday, I'm going to take my Sunday, and I'm going to do what I want to. So as time goes on, I think we're going to get better and better and better at that. In the interim, for me, it means I got to look in the mirror, and I think that's probably one of the most significant skills that I've had to develop as a journeyman lineman, is to learn so much that I do needs to start with looking in the mirror, and I got to look in the mirror on the mental health one.
Yeah.
I've got to get better at exercising. I've got to get better at getting sleep. I've got to get better at work-life balance. It's not a should. It's a must. And the mental health stuff that I've seen can sometimes be accentuated with posturing that I don't always understand in the line trade, where yes, we're a group of men and women that have to contend with hazardous scenarios sometimes, and yes, we have to work long hours, and toughness is an important part of being in the line trade, but vulnerability is also a benefit too. So I think the ability to acknowledge and accept one another's vulnerabilities would be a huge benefit to us. I think if there was a little less posturing sometimes, a lot of things would get better, including our mental health or our brain health.
Yeah, agreed. It's because of the complexity of the trade and the diversity of what you actually get into doing for for work, whether you're a tramp style lineman or a utility lineman who has the opportunity to just work an 8-hour day and say no to overtime, really plays a factor as well, right?
Yeah.
And then posturing within that. I know there's the road life and that tramp life. I just, people gotta be careful with it, and it's such a slippery slope. Because yeah, you get lonely, you get bored. Like we're
Yeah.
doers. You're doing things when you're working. Like that's what you hear. I just want to work. I just want to work. Like they hate a day off on the road. If a surprise day off comes, like a weather day, or you need to take, the schedule says, hey, you guys get Sunday off. It's this whining and complaining because they want to work and they want to do stuff and they don't want to be stuck on the road, you know. But take the opportunity in those times to check yourself and go do something for yourself. Find something to do, get out of the hotel room or out of
Yeah.
the bar, and go
Yeah.
do something for yourself that's actually going to benefit you. And like you
Yeah.
said, check yourself, look at yourself in the mirror, and spend some time on yourself. That's what I would have to add to it, because I've started to do that for myself, especially just trying to get into these little routines that are helping me, helping my body, get myself in shape, get my mind in shape. The things I'm reading and listening to, they're growing my brain.
Yeah.
It's not garbage, and I'm trying to do these little things that are making a big difference. I know, so that's what I would have to add to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, on the incident side of things, I know that through probably being a safety advocate and being out in the world and teaching things like grounding and bonding and things like that, you've acquired some knowledge in these areas, and you've probably been a part of incident investigations or things like that. Is there anything you want to touch on with stories you have of incidences, or words of wisdom for the guys out there about some of the situations you've run into?
Mm. Yeah. Wow. That's a great question, Ryan. I think number one, first and foremost, is stay curious. Stay curious whenever there's some anomaly. Many, many times it seems a common component in uh, some of the incidences I've seen is there's something that is just marginally different for some reason. And sometimes with induction accidents, it's people feeling like they're getting bit in the morning, and then in the afternoon, all of a sudden, it's an electrical contact, or maybe there's a fire that takes place where there's something discoloring, or in rigging accidents, maybe it's a little additional wear on a component, or maybe it's a component that just hasn't been used before, or maybe it's something that is starting to show signs of material deformation. Um, so number one for me, I like to stay curious, and then I think our foundation really needs to be set with the rules and laws that govern our work, and those chief rules, chief among all, are Newton's laws and Ohm's laws. And there's Lord knows there's all kinds of policies and regulations and stuff governing our safety in this industry, but the big ones: staying out of the bite, not getting in series,
Yeah.
asking yourself, do I have everything covered up? That's huge. Um, a lot of those are mentioned in code and mentioned in regulation, but unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is too hard to carry around
Yeah.
from job to job to job to job. Most guys don't look at a particular project they have to do or some work they have to do and say, okay, well, I know what applies here. What applies here is 1910.269 M subpart I subpart 6. And it doesn't go down like that. So I think those are really, really, really beneficial. Another one is the fact that our culture, I think, is probably one of the the greatest strengths and also at times one of the greatest weaknesses in line work. And one of the greatest strengths is that we can determine something to have a high value to the community or to our culture, and our execution of it is marvelous. I like to talk about square washers because square washers to me are emblematic of how strong line culture is. So if you travel across North America right now and start reading incidents and accidents, let's just say with equipotential grounding, you'll read them in Canadian utilities, contractors, United States utilities and contractors, small, large, it runs a gamut. We have a lot of grounding accidents, particularly with induction or misidentifying or not testing circuits. There is a grounding committee after a grounding committee after a grounding committee after a grounding committee after a grounding committee from company to company to company to company. And there are rules and laws and rules and laws and rules and laws. But we're still having these incidents and accidents. And I was thinking about the fact one day that never in my life have I ever gone to work for a contractor or a utility and read their square washer policy. And I've never heard of anybody saying, oh yeah, I'm on the square washer committee at a utility or a contractor, which is interesting to me because this year I was in Maine, I was in Florida, I was in California, I was in Alaska, and I was in Canada. And as I looked at power lines, the way linemen are always looking at power lines as they're going throughout life, I noticed that on about 98% of the poles, the washers are oriented in a manner so they're square. Somebody has taken a few seconds, some pride, some professionalism, some intentionality, and they squared them. Now that's across every corner of this continent, and that's on old power lines, that's on new power lines, so that's across generations. How does that happen so effectively and so flawlessly? There's not a rules committee for that.
Yep.
There's not a written policy for that. That's lineman teaches apprentice, who grows up to become lineman, who teaches apprentice, who grows up to be lineman, teaches apprentice, and then pretty soon, boom, it is a cultural expectation and a norm. So with some aspects of safety, we need to make things part of that cultural norm. It needs to be a value for us to ask, okay, wait a minute, what is our bonding and grounding scheme here? And when I get ready to cut these jumpers open, what am I going to have in parallel with my body?
Yep.
Or as we get ready to try to drag this pole into this backyard to set it between these two houses, when we set up this backyard machine, or if we're using a set of blocks off the old pole, exactly how much does it weigh? And exactly what is the ultimate breaking strength of our rigging components, and who's going to be standing where? We need to make those kind of conversations and that kind of thinking, deep thinking about the work we're doing, part of our cultural fabric. Just the way it is with the square washer, because you and I have both dedicated a portion of our career to squaring a washer, or to maybe making a tie wire look nice, or maybe to shaping a jumper, and all that's marvelous. That really is. That's good stuff. Pride is important as linemen, but I've never been to a funeral for a lineman because he had a crooked jumper.
Yeah.
Ever. So bring our culture to bear, and the way we bring our culture to bear is when we take ownership of the fact that you and I and every other soul currently engaged in line work are the authors of our culture. We define what is acceptable, we define what is not acceptable, we do that on a daily basis, and it is such a big matter that every single one of us has a part in it.
Yeah, I was told this is the way you take pride in your trade. This is the way you become a tradesman. You pay attention to things like squaring the washer. That's the true trade craft right there. That's how somebody will know that you're a tradesman and you're taking pride in what you do. But I agree with what you're saying. That mindset needs to shift to, people will know I'm a good tradesman because of the way I perform bonding and grounding,
Yes.
or whatever other rigging tactics. Like, am I just using shitty chunk of rope with knots in it, or did I take the time to, choose and select a properly rated sling and other components like shackles and blocks, and I know my weights and forces? Like, that's what a true tradesman is and should be. You're nailing it 100%. Those are what tells. That's what I would look at now, being 20 years into it. I would look and go, that guy's a true tradesman. That guy that explains to me proper rigging procedures and can walk me through, understanding what that is and the calculations involved, or stringing setups, or grounding, equal potential bonding setups on your stringing site and your puller and tensioner end. Like, explaining that to me, that's what would tell. I would look at that now and go, that's a tradesman. I wouldn't necessarily look at the washer, though that same guy is squaring the washer still.
Oh yeah, yeah, certainly.
But yeah, you're 100% right. How do we make that a value? That's it right there. It's going to take each and every one of us and a mindset shift, I think.
That's it. And that's, if there's any advantage to the fact that we've got so many people retiring right now, it's the possibility that today we've got a generational shift that presents an opportunity to also have a cultural shift in line work. And I call our current time to be the golden age of linemen, because you and I have tools like we've never seen before. Battery powered tools, incredible bucket trucks that lift things and can extend and can retract, and line equipment that you can operate with a remote control, or you can put a robotic arm on and manipulate high voltage transmission conductors with. And we've got super classes of rope that are intensely dielectric and at the same time very, very, very strong. We've got all sorts of neat lightweight rigging components and fall protection components that are coming into our trade from other trades, like emergency response and rock climbing. And I mean, we've got this amazing technology at our disposal, and at the same time, you and I can drag the phone out of our pocket and Google more information and more knowledge than existed for entire generations of linemen, those guys who went before us. Yeah. And at this point, we've put enough people in the cemeteries that we've got codes and regulations and rules and policies. And you and I have got so much relative to previous generations of linemen that I really think we take ownership of the fact that this is the golden age of line work. And in this golden age, I think the most important skill to emerge in the 21st century are going to be the soft skills of linemen. Yeah. It's going to be the fact that we have transcended the notion that we're just hammer swingers and wrench turners and shovel operators and guys that climb, or gals that climb. And now we are people who can not only harness all that, but also harness interpersonal communications, personal development, awareness, sensitivity, empathy, all these things that linemen haven't had empathy or communications at the top of their list for a long time, because they were spinning armor rods on with an armor rod wrench.
Yeah, no kidding. What do you say to the guy then? I get a call from a guy that's working in Southern California, and he says, Ryan, I didn't know how to answer this question, but I think we need to jump on a podcast and talk about some of these things, because I still have these sorts of questions coming to me every day. And the question is, this lineman says, I think that they should bring back free climbing, because I think that that's the true, that we're losing our trade skills when they took away free climbing. And I just sat there and I'm like, man, we're so far advanced I'm advanced from a mindset like that.
Yeah.
How do you get our trade? The guy is seriously asking this question and saying this, like, we need to bring back free climbing because that's the true, trade form, and we're losing our trade skills when they remove that. Where do you start with that when that's one end? We got us talking about, being advanced, and you got the other end there. How
Yeah.
do we get to that guy or that gal?
Well, so, and I've got to think about this on two dimensions, because I kind of was that guy at one point. I remember when they came out to us when I was working at Bonneville and said, "Hey, we want you guys to go to 100% wood pole fall protection." And we kind of threw a fit and said, "No, we don't want to do that." And there was even a letter that a bunch of us signed our names to, and I was one of those people that wrote my name and said, "No way, don't make us use 100% fall protection." But probably the best friend I've ever had in the trade died from a fall off a transmission tower in Kellogg, Idaho. Well, amazing human being. His name was Matt Carstetter. Awesome guy, big, strong, smart, funny, just a great guy to be on a crew with. The moment I learned about what happened, I changed my perspectives about fall protection 180 degrees. The moment.
See,
and that hypocrisy that I find myself having to address. It to me, when it seemed distant, man, I didn't want to have anything to do with the change in fall protection that took place a few years ago. With those people today, the best thing that I can think to say is, okay, if we're going to give up 100% fall protection on the wood, and if we're going to be purist, if we're going to be line work traditionalist, then let's grab the felt hats, and let's grab the spade and spoon and digging bar, and let's grab the manila rope and the wooden blocks and the wooden hot sticks and the handmade D-rings. At one point in time, linemen made their own D-rings. They took copper and brazed them together and made their own D-rings. Now, isn't it interesting that many people who proclaim that we're destroying the trade because we're changing by going to 100% fall protection are also the same people that have never brazed their own D-rings?
yeah.
So I think their sense of history is entirely conflated, and probably conflated a little bit with some insecurity and some ego. To those guys, I would say, please get the F out of the way.
Yeah.
Because at one point in this trade, one half of us died on the job.
Yeah.
And there has been a drumbeat from, and I often talk about a lineman who I think is probably one of the most influential linemen in North America ever. Many people don't know his name. His name was John Feeks. And lineman John Feeks died very publicly on the streets in New York City when he climbed up a structure and reached out to grab a line that he thought was de-energized. And he burned in front of hundreds of onlookers. And then coworkers arrived, and when they got ready to lower him down to the ground, they started to cut the wires. And as the wires came crashing down to the street, the people on the street shrieked and they ran away in terror. Now, this was right in the midst of the war of currents between Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse. And so the press wrote about it for months. You can read letters to the editors published in the New York Times. And what came out of that was something where communities across this country literally tried to ban the installation of power lines. People were terrified at the idea that we would have electricity in society. Now, if it were not the electricity that you and I take for granted today, humanity takes an entirely different course through the 20th century.
Yeah.
They've studied it, and it's cross-cultural, it's across the world, it's a global phenomenon. The most important thing you give modern-day human beings is a kilowatt of electricity. Babies
Yep.
are more likely to survive childbirth, people live longer lives, literacy, the whole nine yards. So at the foundation of that is lineman safety, because if the people, or electrical worker safety for that matter, if the people that work on these systems can't keep themselves safe, then they can't keep the system safe for the people they serve. And so from John Feeks until this day, we've had a marvelous tradition in line work. The marvelous tradition in line work is called perpetual change, evolution. of all the traditions that we celebrate in line work, let us celebrate the tradition that what happened in the last generation, and the generation before that, and the generation before that, and the generation before that, is somebody said, you know what, I'm going to be marginally better, and I'm going to make sure that the next generation that comes is also marginally better. And from that, we get the efflorescence of linemen in the 21st century, where we've got marvelous jobs, marvelous tools, marvelous technologies, and we maintain this vastly important electrical system that is as significant to our society as fire was to our ancestors. And it's because guys and gals have had the stones to change and adapt. That reason alone. So those people that want to fold their arms and say, no, I don't want to, they're kind of the grounds that you just need to dump out of the filter at the end of the day. I mean, they're the people that are clogging us up.
Yep.
And the challenges facing 21st century linemen are significant, really significant. We've got aging infrastructure. We've got more induction than we've ever had before. We've got higher fault currents than we've ever had before. We've got manpower shortages like you wouldn't believe. 5G infrastructure is about to hit the distribution systems of the developed world. Yeah. We have got a whole new host of challenges presented to us. The only way we're going to succeed is in the same way that we've always succeeded, is by being men and women who have the courage and the audacity to adapt and improve and evolve. So, yeah, I wish I had a magic wand to wave those people out of the trade. Unfortunately, they're always going to be in our midst.
Well, I love what you said, and I think that if the people listening to this agree with that, it's something that they can listen to again and again and repeat back, because I think there's a lot of value in that, to go back to that person if they're ever faced with a question like that from somebody and say, look, listen to this. Like, we're an advancing race. Like, yeah. Look at where we've come from. Look where we've come from. You can even see this, like, as Americans, go back to your roots, and Canadians for that matter, go back to your roots. The people that first, you disappeared there for a second. Still there?
Yes. I got to plug my computer in real quick.
Okay, no worries. I was going to say, the people who first landed on our shores were the adventure seekers. And the people who were willing to give up what they had for a life in Europe and venture across an ocean to get here.
Yeah.
Like, what did that take? That took advancement. They didn't do the same things as they were doing, or their daddies and mummies did before that. So same sort of approach, scale that to our trade. It applies today,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's celebrated by the kind of people that would prefer that we lag. Change is celebrated when it shows up in a battery-powered tool.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, when we have to change a method that we might do some work, when those people whine it, man, it's just kind of a nasty type of hypocrisy that is, it's hard to get my mind around, other than the fact I've got to acknowledge I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there. I've been one of those guys who initially responds by saying, dude, what? Don't take free climbing away from me.
Yeah. I've been there as well, but the key statement there is you've been there and you've accepted something different, and you've changed your mindset on it. And that's my hope for everyone. That's my hope for this guy that asked this question. That's something I don't want it to be the death of somebody that he loved or himself that made him shift his mindset. I would love for it to be just a conversation he had, and the guy that had the conversation with him was able to change his mindset right then and there and go, okay, you know what? I agree with this. You're right. I got to change. I got to make some changes here. Maybe it's one step at a time, but it's one small change at a time. That's all. I'd hate for it to be a fatality that changes his mindset. That's what I want to stay away from.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, that's the other sort of ugly tradition that we've got in this industry that often compels action. And it's sad that it's usually that compels action. But um,
You
the
know,
truth is, many of the things that you and I take for granted in terms of rules and policies are driven, as you know, um, by the fact that we lost somebody.
yeah.
So that's why I call my efforts written in red,
Mm,
because the rules and policies we have are literally written in red.
yeah. That's a good name. And you look like if you look at the innovation of tools, like we talked about tools a little bit and tooling, and if you look at that progression of tools, and I know that we briefly talked about this when we talked on the phone the other day, and you brought up the Mount Whitney tap, and I went back and I started reading about that, and I really appreciated you bringing that up, and it really painted a good picture of the progression of hotline tools. So maybe for this audience, explain what the Mount Whitney tap was, because I remembered it once you told me, but I couldn't remember it fully. So explain what that was, and then let's walk through like the progression of hotline tooling to today and what you're seeing maybe as innovation for the future.
Yeah. Um, so the Mount Whitney tap was a magical moment in the electrical utility industry, and it was really driven by linemen. And it really made electrical power so much more economical that its utilization could be much more widespread. When the first power systems were built, connectors had not yet been devised, tools had not yet been devised to work on them while they were in an energized state. So if you were going to perform maintenance somewhere or to extend that network, you'd have to kill the entire thing. And imagine what that would be like for our businesses today if every time we had to go out and set a pole, we had to dump the entire city, right? I mean, nobody would have electricity if that were the case today.
Yeah.
You'd just be out all the time. So, some pioneering linemen decide to try an experiment and to do something where they take a copper jumper and they tie it into an insulator, and then they bend a distinctive hook on the end of it. So when it comes to making and breaking connections, they can pick up the insulator pin and be insulated from this jumper and hook these hooks onto a phase in order to make and break connections. Now, loads were much smaller then, voltages were much smaller then, and of course, we would be violating all kinds of safety rules if we were to do this today. But that's what they did, and when it proved to work, then that practice began to lend itself to the fact that more and more value could be derived from the electrical system if we didn't have to shut it off to work on it.
Hmm.
And so over time, things continue to develop. And one of my favorite facts, and this is a fact about EPZ, this is an absolute fact. EPZ was not invented by health and safety professionals in the 1990s. It was not contrived by some electrical engineers on some grounding committee. The first linemen to practice EPZ were linemen who were seeking to find a way to perform live line maintenance. So what they discovered was they could climb up a pole and they could take a brass rod or a nail and they could drive it into the side of that wooden pole. And on a pure delta circuit, if no other copper jumper, wrap it several times around that nail, and then attach it to the phase they wanted to work on. And it's documented that this takes place in 1915 in the state of Colorado for the Public Service Electric Corporation of Colorado, something like that. It's a forerunner of Excel. So, and figure out not only that they can build a parallel circuit around their body to control the voltage across their body, which is at the heart of EPZ today.
Yeah.
they also figure out ways to work on lines and to change insulators and fix things and keep the loads that those lines were serving in power. And the loads in that part of the country at that part of time were often mines, which were very, very significant for economic activity. So
Yep.
we go from the Mount Whitney tap to basically equipotential hot work on a delta circuit. And those guys also, one of my favorite historical anecdotes, and I'm sorry if I get a little excited here, Ryan.
No, this is
Those
awesome.
those guys figure out something else while they're doing this EPZ, single phase EPZ on a delta circuit. And you should, if you haven't seen, if the listeners have not seen American Lineman, every single person that is either a lineman or wants to be a lineman should order a copy of the American Lineman.
Yeah.
I wish they called it the North American Lineman in deference to our Canadian brethren, but
That's the way it goes.
anyways, yeah. So they figure out that if they attach the jumper to a phase, they're a-okay while they're standing on the pole to work on that phase. But the moment they reach out to work on another phase, if they're not bonded to it, it's like going phase to phase then.
Yeah.
So those guys start to develop a work practice where they say, you know what, if we're performing live maintenance, we only work on one phase conductor at a time. Today, that is a universal axiom of energized maintenance, working on one phase conductor at a time.
Yep.
And then within a couple years, 1918, the Tips Tool Company comes into service, and now we start to see the development of hotline tools. Very shortly after, the White Rubber Company starts to improve rubber gloves, and boom, the electrical system can expand exponentially, and we can serve way more people and way more loads and do so economically because we don't have to shut every single person off in order to maintain the system. So that means that the electricity that people develop and our economy develops along with is really fostered by the fact that some linemen are innovative enough to figure out live line maintenance. And from a historical standpoint, that's huge. If you look at World War II, the Canadian and American war effort in World War II looks completely different if we don't have electricity. Wonderful generals and stuff like that helped us win World War II, but a huge component of our success in defeating the Nazis is the fact that we can produce planes and tanks and guns and bullets very, very effectively. Why? Because we had a massive electrical system. And some of the world's best technicians maintaining it and working on it. And seeing that process can improve. And of course, the 1950s, 1960s, you start to see the development of live line bear handing, which I think live line bear handing is just starting.
Absolutely.
To see its development. When I was on the EPRI Live Working Committee, I remember there was a program they were talking about trying to create some funding around a technology where you would pull the stringing equipment onto a super insulated platform, and you'd build basically an equipotential zone on top of this super insulating platform. And if you had an old transmission line that you wanted a reconductor, rather than do a D-phase reconductor and having to install another line adjacent to the one, you would pull the old wire out, dragging the new wire in, pulling wire sock to sock while leaving it all hot at transmission.
Wow.
And there's PhDs and people doing research into this. So, and for me, the live line arms, whether they be Quanta's robotic arm, or I believe Diversified is got a high voltage insulating arm that they're using now. That has been just a marvelous tool to extend how far live line working can go. And helicopter maintenance, of course, rope access. I got to do some rope access at Bonneville for bare hand maintenance. That extends how far we can go. In Europe and in parts of South America, they've done quite a bit of stuff in substations associated with live line maintenance. The interesting thing to me about live line maintenance is not only the fact that it's got a direct correlation to how economical electrical energy is, But statistically speaking, we're generally safer when we don't shut the stuff off,
Yeah.
especially
Oh,
transmission.
100%. I
So
was a part of, you said rope access there, and I was a general foreman on a project where 2,000 structures, we changed 500 kV insulators and added arcing horns on 2,000 structures in the mountains of BC,
yeah,
and did it all with pickup trucks, ropes, and wheels, all
yeah,
energized. Some de-energized, but most of it was energized. Bare hand procedures. It's amazing what you can do. One guy's like, it's amazing what linemen can do with just some ropes and wheels. It's a fact. And through bare hand work, and bare hand work methods, we were able to do that on 2,500 kV 4 bundle structures. We were able to
yeah,
change, and
yeah,
be really efficient at it too. Like,
yeah. And that is a marvelous
yeah,
technical achievement.
yeah,
Just the fact that you can keep people alive
yeah,
and hoist them a couple 100 feet off the ground and attach them to 500,000 volts and
yeah,
get them to fix stuff. That's amazing in and of itself. But also amazing is the fact that having the propensity and the prowess at doing something like that means we don't have to turn around and go to our ratepayers and say, hey, look, folks, this line is worn out. We need to clear miles and miles of timber. We
yeah,
need to buy thousands of pounds or millions of pounds of steel, and we've got to build another power line because power lines, as beautiful as you and I find power lines,
yeah,
they also come at a cost.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Another neat, a neat project and a neat kind of innovation was, it's been around for a while, but a composite core conductor, and
yeah,
just its ability to be at full load, minimal sag to it. So
yeah,
same sort of thing, rather than
yeah,
clearing hectares of land,
yeah,
trees, you
yeah,
can just use the same towers and same structures and string new conductor that has, a 5-inch sag at full load.
yeah,
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah. It is amazing stuff. We did have, unfortunately, well, we lost a brother down here. His name's Cliff Johnson. Um, He was crossing a span of composite conductor that they'd recently strung in across the Columbia River, and it failed catastrophically, and he went into the Columbia River. And that just happened. The accident investigations are still underway, so I can't speak to why that conductor failed or what happened. Um, but that's another thing that I think needs to be on our radar.
Mm.
The pace of change for you and I has quickened.
Yep.
The rate with which technology and information and things come at us, and new products for that matter, new materials. Um, Sometimes it can kind of come at peril when we don't completely know all the limitations.
Yep.
And I don't know what, like I said, I don't know what happened with this particular composite conductor, but I do know. Um, I guess that's the ugly side of innovation and change.
Yeah.
Is I've seen things when different types of insulators. The first couple thermoplastic insulators I saw
Mm.
um, had a tendency to melt prematurely until they got the molds figured out, or they got the blend of plastic figured out. So yeah,
This
energized
is
maintenance
the
needs to
yeah.
continue, and I I really like the fact that now that there's a couple different people providing technologies for training for energized maintenance to get even better. The virtual reality stuff, I don't know if you've seen
Yep.
the virtual reality bare hand training.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah, and
just
there's
even I've been able to put the headset on a couple of times, and it is really cool. One scenario I got put into was, just even a walkthrough of the components of a substation, and you could like point to a switch and get the full. This was a real substation, and
yeah,
I'm in one place. I was in Calgary, Alberta, and this was a substation from in the city of Vancouver, I believe, and I could walk through. I could point my thing at whatever component in that substation. I could get a complete map in front of me of what that thing did, what its
yeah,
service, what it was, and then it would shoot me to the control room and take me right to the panel that controlled that switch. And amazing. And I didn't even have to step foot in the station, and I
yeah,
could learn the entire station. And another thing was, a full-on bare hand live line procedure, where two people were virtually changing out an insulator string or something on a 500 kV line, and you could essentially just float through this procedure as they perform it, and you could be inside of it and position yourself in any angle and see what they were doing, and watch what they were doing and how they were doing it. Just virtually putting yourself in the procedure. Yeah, it's really cool stuff. Really cool stuff what they're
Yeah,
doing. Yeah.
yeah. And there's another company back east called Timpson Training, and
Okay.
they've come out with a technology that you can set up in a yard, and you connect it to some lines that you want to conduct energized training on, and it's real voltage, but it's got a really advanced circuit design to it. So when you power the system up, it reads the total amount of charging current for the entire system, the training yard
Oh, wow.
and the transformer that powers it. And then if there's any deviation in current outside of a few milliamps, it'll instantly de-energize itself. So
Ah,
back when I learned energized hot sticking, we used 1 amp fuses, right? Well,
yeah.
a 1 amp fuse, that's a little excessive. So this technology now allows you, and they've got a transmission unit, so you can do live line barehanding training, and if somebody screws up, you don't run that same enormous risk that we've run as you and I have gone through
Yep.
barehand training, where arc flash would be enormous, or some sort of
Yeah.
electrocution would be enormous. So yeah.
So that's really what you see as the innovation and advancements in our trade at the moment would be these advancements to training, kind of more than
Training,
anything. Yeah.
yeah, and I think autonomous
Yeah.
technologies are going to continue to come. There's been a few. There's been that Line Scout robot that BC Hydro, and I think Ontario Hydro, or the
Hydro One.
Hydro
Yeah.
out of, yeah, they Hydro Quebec, they collaborated on it. Now I see there's a commercialized version of it that Kinetrix or somebody is selling or utilizing. Um, I was reading about a vacuum truck that somebody's got, an autonomous vac truck, so you can set the thing up and put some stakes in the ground, and it'll
Oh, wow.
suck a bunch of pole holes for you autonomously, and you can have stuff around, like you can have communications,
Huh.
and it'll negotiate that. It is it As it vacuums out this hole, if it encounters an obstacle, it'll stop until somebody can assure that it's safe to continue excavating. So
Huh.
I think as time moves on, we're going to start to emerge more and more as being technologists, where part of our maintenance and part of our work procedures are going to utilize technology that's got more autonomy to it. So um, I think that's really part of the future of energized maintenance.
Cool.
Yeah,
Um, you've done some work overseas, and I want to touch on this before we maybe get to some closing remarks here. But you've done some work with overseas linemen and electrical workers. I'd love for you to talk about what that's kind of been and what your experiences with that have looked like, and
sure.
and maybe how other people could get involved with that sort of thing. Because I know, the idea of travel, like myself being a lineman and myself just personally, I'm got a gypsy soul to me anyway. I love
Yeah,
moving around and doing different things. And I know lots of people, that's been one of the benefits, working where I work. It's pretty, we have that opportunity to be transient. So,
yeah.
what have you done and experienced with that?
So my first experience took place. I was working at a line school that Avista operates in Spokane, and Gonzaga University has got a master's program in transmission and distribution engineering. So these people came up from South America and were kind of touring the training facility. And I asked them what their training program was like, and they said they wanted to make one, or they didn't have one, and they wanted to develop one. And so I volunteered to go down and help them. And I found myself flying to a little country in South America called Suriname, and met the people at the utility there, and met the linemen there, and went out and got to do a little bit of work with them. And number one, I found the people to be extremely kind. And it was my first real international experience. I'd been to Canada, I'd been to Mexico, but it was the
Yeah.
first time I'd really gotten a long way from borders of the United States, and it was a really rewarding experience. So I decided that what I needed to do was build some kind of project where I could bring other volunteer American linemen back down to that country, and we could start to develop some sort of training processes and help them try to develop an apprenticeship. So the following year, I recruited a friend of mine from Bonneville Power named Kurt Schreiber, and a guy from utility in central Washington, Douglas PUD. His name was Joe Baker, and then a retired Avista lineman who now works construction. I think he was working for Hinkles the last time I talked to him. His name was Rick Irvin. The four of us went down there, and we really sat down to start doing this training program. And we ended up in 2 weeks working with a couple hundred linemen, and just teaching some foundational stuff. Basics of rigging and knot tying, and electrical safety, and bonding and grounding, and fall protection, and pole top rescue, and all that sort of stuff. And it was such a powerful experience for us, and something that interested enough people that I began to get some requests to do some speaking engagements at IBEW functions across the country. So as I started to talk about it, it drew more and more energy. So the next year, IBEW Local 1245 out of California got an entire contingent of guys, and we came up with a cargo container of materials to donate, and we went back down. Local 222 out of Florida donated a bunch of hand lines and stuff for us. So we went down the next year. I think the next year there was 14 of us, and I started to really see the impact of what this kind of lineman to lineman outreach from the developed world to the developing world could really look like, and some of the beauty of it. And one of the first things that I saw was we went there with the intention of sharing with them, and we ended up having so much stuff shared with us and gaining so much from the experience that it was it was kind of a double blessing. It was a reward for everybody involved. And taking a bunch of volunteer linemen from a bunch of different parts of the country in the United States meant all the volunteers that got to participate got to do more networking across the trade and learn from one another and find out how things are done at SMUD or Pacific Gas and Electric or NV Energy or Portland General Electric, or all of these power companies that participated sent linemen who came back richer for the experience. And then the cultural experience was awesome, because as a North American, you kind of look through this lens where sometimes you can be led to believe there's us, people that look like you and me and talk like you and go to McDonald's and everything. And then there's them. And you go work with linemen in other countries, you realize that while they might speak a different language or the food they eat is a little different, linemen are linemen. I don't care where you go. I mean, we are a universal character, broke from a special mold, designed to keep humanity in electrical power. And it doesn't matter if you're in the United States or Canada or someplace in South America or the Caribbean or something. We are a special cast of characters that is got way more in common than we ever have different. So I just got back from Colombia, which is fantastic because there's a very strong community of Latin American linemen that coalesce around a Facebook page called Hermandad de Linieros en el Mundo. And I've been watching their conversations and stuff on that Facebook page for a while. And as a young apprentice, somebody once told me that a good lineman learns from everyone. And I noticed an interesting thing over time on social media in particular. There is kind of a smugness at times or an arrogance at times that we North American linemen can develop in terms of how we view ourselves relative to our colleagues that work in other countries. And there were several times I observed linemen from developing nations trying to participate in some sort of forum on say Line Junk or some of those early lineman Facebook pages. And there were times where people would be assholes for lack of a better word, and arrogant. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of the guys in the developing world have got a harder job than you and I, but those linemen are also linemen like we've always been. They're innovators and problem solvers. And if you were asked to ask Canadian linemen and American linemen how to climb a concrete pole, most American linemen and Canadian linemen would say we can't. In South America, I just had the benefit of having some linemen from a utility called EPM and a very prominent instructor from Colombia by the name of Oscar Guarin teach me how to use a set of maneras. Now,
Cool.
maneras are a set of rope slings. Some linemen make their own. Now, how lineman is this, right? You got electricity that you got to get to the school, into the hospital, into the businesses, into the homes, and they want to put it on concrete poles. How do you get up there? Leave it to a lineman to figure out how to take 3-strand rope and to weave a set of slings that you can ascend a concrete pole with. And I mean, I need to go to climbing school for concrete poles for a while. It took me a while to get up the stick.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yeah.
And that's something I would like to see in the 21st century. Is I would like to see more cultural diffusion and more informational exchange from linemen in developed countries to linemen in developing countries, because in order for these developing countries to develop, they need that one magical element we call electricity.
Yeah.
And that magical element is largely delivered upon the backs and shoulders of men and women proud enough and noble enough to call themselves linemen. And if there is just a little bit of help that you and I can lend them, and we can graciously receive that little bit of help and benefit they can share with us, we're all going to be richer for it. So the IBEW has created a official nonprofit for this endeavor now. It's called Electrical Workers Without Borders North America. And it's by no means the only opportunity to do this. The cooperatives in the United States have something called NRECA International, where they do something very similar. And the IBEW is one they're actually partnering with the French Electrical Workers Union, the Italian Electrical Workers Union, the Spanish Electrical. Yeah, so it's truly a global organization now. The German chapter was just recognized by Angela Merkel. And it wasn't a project that I was involved with, but one I'm super proud of is a group of IBEW electrical workers out in New York met with a bunch of Italian electrical workers, and they went to a maternity hospital in Angola and built a solar electric system and a low voltage distribution system for the only pregnancy hospital that's in that part of Angola. Women walk 50 miles to get to this hospital in order to have their children in a place where there's doctors and electrical energy. So moving forward, I got another project where I'm looking for people who are experienced at the role of, say, a GF or a manager, because the utility I've been working with in Suriname wants us to come back down and do a week-long session of how to conduct safety audits or job site safety visits.
Yep.
And so I'm trying to, you should come with me, Ryan.
All right.
I'm trying to,
let's do it.
To bring some guys together that have that level of experience, so we can go down and share what we know and learn what they know. And I've got another project I'm trying to put together on the island of St. Kitts and Nevis, where it's a climbing school, and we'll do some transformer connection stuff. We'll do some medium voltage cable terminations and some rigging stuff.
That sounds good. Sounds awesome.
That'll be sometime in June or July. In Bangladesh, I've had a project for about 4 years now, and this is one of my favorite power of social media experiences. We've got a Facebook page in Bangladesh, and in Bangladesh and India, several hundred linemen die every year, every single year. And if you look at this Facebook page, as you scroll through this page, it's about every week to 2 weeks, there's another fatality that's posted on there. And Usually it's a body hanging off a pole or somebody on a blue tarp being carted away from a workplace. So there's a couple linemen in that country that I've worked with for quite a while now, and they're amazing guys. I love them for the linemen they are. One is Raqibul Islam, and the other guy's name is Rokan Khan. And we've done a couple things. We've done PPE donations to that country. We sent belts and skids and fall arrest and voltage detectors is a big thing they're working on. This is a country where testing and grounding is not established or protected by regulation. And then Rockable was the one that turned me on to the power of Facebook Live. So we started to do some Facebook Live sessions where I would do a little bit of discussion and training stuff, and then he'd do a little bit of training and discussion stuff. And now he regularly hosts Facebook Live lineman training meetings or Facebook Live safety meetings, and it will include at times up to 1,000 linemen.
That's amazing. See, that's the kind of thing that, just to pause you for a second, that's the kind of thing, like, that's something we should be doing here as well. And
yeah,
I try to tell these people, like, look how, it's awesome to hear that. It's really cool to hear that. I got so much to say on that, but I wish that we would adopt that more and use the power of the internet. Every platform goes live now, and why not?
Yeah, exactly. There's no reason not to. And then, like with Rockable, as I watched those Facebook Live meetings go, there's dialogue among the participants, and then pretty soon I start to notice, wow, there's a bunch of guys I know that are following along with this from the United States, and then there's guys from Angola and guys from Dubai and guys from South America, and then pretty soon what I see emerging across this platform, this Power Lineman podcast platform, I think is the inevitability that's going to happen. At some point, linemen in the international community are going to coalesce, and our level of cultural diffusion and knowledge sharing is going to really go far. Could you imagine if you were one of the linemen with Henry Miller or John Feeks or one of those guys at the turn of the century, if you could watch Ryan Lucas today using rope access on a 500 kV line, what that would be like?
Yep.
That's like space age line work, right?
It's crazy because we can do
the
it.
Next generation of line workers an ability to interact with linemen on every corner of this planet for 10 or 15 years and share best practices and develop technologies.
Boom. Yep.
Amazing.
You nailed it. The internet is an amazing tool. It's in its infancy as well. And like, we didn't even have, so when I was like, I brought the iPhone into the company that I work for because the senior management level people used Blackberries, and then everyone below senior management used flip phones. And this was 2011, 2012. You know, we're using flip phones, senior management using Blackberries. I had my own iPhone 3GS.
Wow.
With email capability. I was taking pictures at the job site with my own phone, taking pictures of the job. I was emailing, senior level at the utility, getting change orders approved, getting, photos of just pictures of the reasons we were even there doing the work that we were doing, like proof that we were, putting a sleeve in. It was the different sleeve and a sleeve on the other side of the structure, and getting approvals for that. And I was doing things like that. And I told the bosses, I'm like, we need this in the field, and we need to use these. Like, look at the advantages of using these devices as tools rather than just, something cool that you have. Anyway, fast forward a few years, and it's only a few years, and look at what we're talking about for innovation in the industry and connecting around the world now with people via the internet and sharing these trade knowledge and trade secrets. And this is a really cool thing, and it can be done virtually. I'm trying to tell people and expand their mind a little bit. just like that guy that wants to free climb. It's a
Yeah.
mindset shift for a lot of people. They don't want to accept that you can do all of this just over the internet now, but you can. You can.
Yeah.
I could talk to you and say, "Hey, have you tried this rope? It's a rope that's created here. And if you do it and you do this splice and you hook it like this, you can ascend the tower." That would blow somebody's mind who's never even had the chance to even think like that, you
Yeah.
know? And now you've just changed their whole world. And who knows what that innovative lineman in another side of the world could potentially produce just by that little spark of, you know, what he learned. So
Yeah.
it's really cool. It's really
Yeah, it
cool.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else? We're at almost 2 hours here. Is there anything else you kind of
Wow,
wanted to
that was
touch on for
two
now?
hours. Are you
I know
kidding
it's
me?
crazy. I think
Uh,
you're a repeat guest. I think we're gonna have you on again.
okay. Okay.
So is there anything else that you kind of want to close this one out with, or before we get
Mm,
to where people can find you?
um, Geez, how would I close this out? Well, first of all, Ryan, I'd like to close this out by thanking you for your advocacy of linemen and the trade and your willingness to step into this media and to create a forum for people like me and so many of your other great guests to share what we're passionate about and more than that, to share what matters so intensely for the communities that we serve.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you for that.
Awesome. I appreciate that a lot. You bet.
Yeah, and um, I guess also in closing, I would say don't get in series, stay out of the bite, look up and live, be good to yourself and be good to those around you. And if you want to find me, I'm on Facebook at Brady Hansen. I'm on Instagram at Brady Hansen 345 or something like that. I'm on Safeguard Equipment's YouTube channel. Um, I do a little bit of YouTube stuff every once in a while, but not a great deal. My training, if somebody's interested in training or something, whether it be for me to come out there or for me to just share what I'm doing or where I get my materials or what I'm doing in terms of my course outlines and stuff. If you go to writteninredtraining.com, um, you can find my website there. My fiance is the one that answers the emails on that. I couldn't do it without her. And she's actually got her master's degree in counseling, and she's the one that's kind of helping me try to work up a curriculum and a course for brain health for and communications for linemen.
Awesome.
She's going to help me with some of my communication stuff too. So um, either way, she can get a hold of you. And I'm also I'm currently on the executive board for Local 77. So if you wanted to reach out to Local 77, they could put you in contact with me too. So
Fantastic, man. I
yeah,
really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing from your heart like you did. You brought a lot of value to these guys and these people out there. So thank you for that.
thank you.